one of the things that makes us human, that began to distinguish us from our hominid ancestors in terms of music. One is the late ethnomusicologist John Blacking. He had this kind of interesting idea, what he calls proto-music and proto-dance. And his idea is that the origins of music were not functional. The origins of music were ecstatic in nature. And so essentially what he was proposing is that there would be rudimentary rhythms that they would play, and they would have these ecstatic experiences dancing, and then they would just sort of spontaneously emit these sounds that the body produces when you're in an ecstatic state. And he really feels that this is the origin of singing and vocalization and so on and so forth.
There are multiple ways of knowing in consciousness, so it takes multiple forms. We often think about it as a rational, in the brain kind of sort of definition for consciousness, but it's also clear in studying the various aspects of the body that the heart, for example, has its own intelligence and its own way of knowing. It's a very strong electrical field. There are ways in which the heart and one person's heart and another person's heart can actually become entrained when they're in proximity. So this begins to lead toward the idea of our connections and the kind of collective consciousness that can occur, from our heads and our hearts, and hopefully from our souls and beyond.
In Aboriginal cultures, and even in our postmodern kind of recreations of raves and festival culture, music and rhythm are a driving connective force that creates a kind of collective entrainment.
But the basic beat functions to entrain for what's called rhythmic entrainment or auditory driving of brainwave beats, the alpha wave and the theta wave.
In other words, we're sitting here right now, I have my brain state, you have your brain state. They may or may not be similar to each other, but if I put on a rhythmic piece of music and we start tapping our feet in rhythm to it, then essentially it's a very effective way of training us to enter a similar brain state.
When people gather together and resonate on the same frequency, everyone's brought into alignment with the beat.
I think on another level, this whole question of entrainment is really interesting. So I would say one thing that we're going through in our culture now is entrainment to and through technology. That people are being entrained by the internet, by cellular communication, by the whole mediated superstructure that we're enmeshed in. And to me, that almost seems like part of a process of creating a global mind or a kind of new etheric consciousness that may be part of this initiatory process into a next level of human consciousness.
And entrainment means that all the rhythms come to be harmonic to each other, not necessarily the same beat, but harmonic to each other. And then if numerous people doing it at the same time, you have the beats of the different people, the rhythms of the different people being harmonic with each other, as well as like you would have in choral chanting, and they're harmonic. They're not singing the same note, that's not the point, but they're harmonic and therefore resonant with one another, so it would produce tremendous feelings of oneness and bonding among people, regardless of the content. See, they may be thinking different thoughts and having different pictures going on in mind. That's the basic idea. What's the DJ doing, or the musicians? You know, they're driving. They're like the conductor, basically, of the whole scene. So, like, just like a symphony orchestra has a conductor, make sure everybody's on the same page and playing the same time and tempo and so on. The difference between of a dance, like a rave, is that there's not the musicians, the performers, and the audience. This basic drum beat is the basic method when you do a shamanic journey without drugs. There's a certain beat you use to travel on, and then there's a signal that you get that means stop, and then there's a fast beat that means come back to your starting point. Because that's the whole point. You want to come back to your starting point. It's always an going in, really, and then a return journey with the knowledge or the information that you obtained. But it was interesting to me to see that, you know, you look at cross-culturally, the studies of the mushroom shamans in Mexico, or the Native American church, or the ayahuasca churches in Brazil, they use singing, but it's always rhythmic singing. You listen to Maria Sabina do her chants, and it's like the ayahuasca thing is the same. I peyote one too, a little faster sometimes. What does that do? That means you keep going. You see, it encourages you to keep going, and therefore counteracts the tendency you might have to get hung up, either distracted or seduced by something, or terrified or paralyzed by something. You just keep going. Through entrainment, that would be similar to when you're choral singing and chanting together. In addition, the rhythm, I think, has another function in terms of shamanic journeys, divination journeys, in the sense that, and this is why in the European cultures, you see, they say, the shamanic cultures, they say the drum beat is the horse. And it's the vehicle. And when you're listening to the drum beat, it furthers your concentration. You have something to concentrate on. It's like as soon as you hear the drum, then you'll be reminded of what the purpose is. And you're reminded of what you're doing. Oh yes, I'm on it. Let me get back to what I'm doing.
To look at the history of these West African possession religions as they come over to the Americas in the slave trade, and of course they are not allowed to practice these religions in the form with which they are accustomed. So for example, in the United States the drum was outlawed. The only place in the United States where the drum wasn't outlawed was New Orleans.
People in a drumming circle or in an ecstatic dance setting are connecting themselves with the continuous legacy of the incarnation of vitality in the form of Homo sapiens.
Oral skill in African American culture, and you can trace it all the way back to West Africa, the griot or the Jolly tradition, where these were sort of court poets who had a sacred function and memorized these long poems of, thousands or tens of thousands of words and so forth. And it goes through, various street lingo in African American culture, and you can even see it in people like Malcolm X or Martin Luther King Jr. or Muhammad Ali, or where there's this kind of function of sacred language. And this is where the word flow comes in, because essentially they're improvising and they're just, and so there's a certain level that you get to where your conscious mind just sort of steps out of the way and the words just flow.
We have, I think, for the last 40,000 years, since self-consciousness had been developing individuality. And maybe the whole development of ego is necessary in order for us to become individuals who are not embedded in nature and just purely children of God. So out of that, we have individuated right up to the edge of individualization destroying us. Now, the way we become multicellular, the way we join together, is first of all by individuals feeling the need to find that divine self within, because you can't really join as an ego with ego.